Hey everyone, I'm Jack.
And I'm Alex.
And in today's video, we'll be ranking the bosses of Capcom's Resident Evil 2 Remake from worst to best. Resident Evil 2 Remake is the benchmark for what a survival horror game should be. Since its release in 2019, its reception from critics and fans alike has been nothing short of unanimous praise, with it being the usual choice in rankings for greatest modern horror game of this generation and greatest video game remake of all time. And as a game, it rivals the classic titans of the horror genre, from Dead Space to Silent Hill 2, and even its fellow Leon Kennedy adventure, Resident Evil 4. Beyond the scope of its genre, Resident Evil 2 may very well be the most influential remake ever, inspiring a slew of modern ports, including top-down remakes of the three games I just used as examples in the previous sentence, and kickstarting the remake trend that's since taken the 8th generation of games by storm. Resident Evil 2 Remake shines in its use of the different gameplay components of the original Resident Evil 2, like map structure and interconnectivity, story, and exploration as a foundation to enhance them in a modern format. On top of reinventing the 1998 original, RE2 Remake introduces enjoyable and simplistic combat, stat-based loot spawns and AI aggression, replayability, and stunning visuals, enhanced by the PS5 hardware's ray tracing system and HDR rendering. Across the Leon and Claire A and B runs, there are a decent amount of bosses for a 3 to 4 hour experience, and none that I can say are any worse than average. While I like to go on questionably long spiels during introductions, like I just did, I'm going to save the rest for another day, with today's video being a deep dive into Resident Evil 2's bosses. How do they stack up? Let's find out.
First up, we got the mutated T-Virus alligator, which looks roughly like I'd imagine the gator from Where's My Water does when you fuck up and give him an acid shower. Correspondingly, he's just as angry as one would expect of someone who has been infected by a bioweapon or had their flesh scalded off by toxic waste. Whether or not this is a boss fight is debatable, but in a game with like 8 boss fights at most, we're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. It's at the bottom of the list because you're basically just holding down on the left stick and running to alternating sides to not get eaten. It's pretty awesome and I have no real quarrel with it, there are just far more involved fights that edge it to the last place spot. As far as bottom of the list bosses go, this is one of the better ones historically.
Seeing as this was my first game in the Resident Evil series, I was not expecting anything remotely Lovecraftian to appear at any point. Although, the more you play this series, the more you know that the early game is grounded and the end game is always hog-fucking wild. William Birkin's exponential mutation is surreal, and although G5 feels somewhat pointless and even uneventful in a similar vein to the T-Virus alligator, your required input goes only as far as being consciously awake, he has one major positive keeping him out of last place. That being story weight. The fragments of the Birkin family's tragedy that subtly emerge as you play through both Leon and Claire gave G5 at least a bit of finality by comparison, along with the true ending that follows. Albeit, G5 is still scripted and not particularly innovative, unlike his previous 4 evolutions. It's surprisingly similar to the original G5 in gameplay, but I much prefer the modern design. Even in today's engines, the old G5 would just look fucking horrible. A product of the 90s, no doubt. Scripted sequences in Resident Evil games are without question memorable, but due to the replayability of the modern remakes, they lose all tension on repeat experiences and usually feel drab, a forced chain of button inputs with no purpose beyond giving first-time players a visual spectacle. This is exacerbated with G5, who is just a teaser cutscene at the end of Leon and Claire A and only appears in the B runs, which, unlike what Reddit will tell you, are barely shortened rehashes of the A runs. Meaning you have to go through all the scripted moments of the game at least twice to unlock a scripted set piece. This is a bit less by the code than others, as you have to fire off every weapon you have left, but that's also not true. If you save some rocket ammo from Super Tyrant, you don't need to dish out shotgun blasts while carefully keeping distance from him like every guide and video will tell you. Instead, you just need to fire off 2 rockets when G5 corners you at the back end of the train and opens his mother eye. And that's it. The true ending was significantly more rewarding than the false ending at the end of Leon and Claire A, and G5 as a boss is fine, just ultimately not exciting and in turn a flat closing boss fight due to the scripted nature of G's death.
You may have noticed that I have this fight dead last rather than the killer gator. The reason I'm not a fan of Super Tyrant is pretty simple. It's kind of fucking annoying. The Super Tyrant, being Mr. X at his most cracked out and insane point, is just as powerful as before and then some. Throughout the game, you've been taught to haul ass out of a room the moment you so much as hear a faint footstep from the guy, and now you're locked in hell in a cell with him. As was the case before, your arsenal isn't good for much more than giving him a deep tissue massage. All that's left is to survive the 90 or so seconds of relentless death punches until Ada thoughtfully lobs a rocket launcher your way to even the odds. Easy enough in words, infuriating in practice. Unlike the remake of the third game, there is no dedicated dodge mechanic to evade incoming attacks. Your survival rides on two factors: your ability to break Mr. X's ankles and your supply of healing herbs. This sounds like a decent idea on paper. What better way to design the final boss than by making it a difficult test of two of the biggest elements of Resident Evil 2, movement and resource management? The problems arise when you consider the following. 1. If you're doing a blind playthrough, there was a decent shot you thought G3 was the final boss of Leon's route, or at least the climax of the combat side of things given how intense it is. I recall having used most of my healing stuff there and haphazardly using the subsequent healing I found to heal from enemies, assuming I was in the home stretch. I was basically working with nothing but the herbs they give you directly prior to the fight, which makes the margin for error minuscule. Unless you are a Giga God speedrunner who can dance around Mr. X like he's nothing and shiv him to death with a combat knife like a roadman, this fight will kick your ass. A lot. He's faster than you are and can reduce you from full health to none in 2 punches. The only way out is by baiting punches and taking advantage of his momentum in the wrong direction to bypass him. Rinse and repeat for what feels like an eternity. I'm pretty good at the game now, or so I like to think, but the best measure of a boss like this is your first experience with them. It just so happens that mine was spending the better part of an hour banging my head against a wall as I watched Leon get his skeleton sucker punched out of his body for the 50th time. I even died once after getting the rocket launcher somehow. I forget the specifics, but remember feeling enraged beyond belief. To sum this all up in one brief sentence, this fight is not fun, but frustrating and unfair. Fuck you, Mr. X, you faster than Leon 2-hit killing piece of shit. At least blasting his torso into blood sludge is extra satisfying. This game has some crazy awesome gore graphics.
In Claire's run, and in turn the canon story of Resident Evil 2, Super Tyrant is actually non-existent and instead replaced by G4, the 4th stage of G's mutation that marks its evolution beyond humanity. In the original Resident Evil 2, both Leon and Claire fight G4 during their escape from Nest, but Super Tyrant only appears afterwards for Leon, an interesting contrast. Anyways, as ridiculous a transformation as G4 is, Claire matches an absurdity by using a minigun to put down the creature. On hardcore, you need to be pretty spotless with your railgun aim, even with the charitable 400 rounds already preloaded into the weapon, but on anything below hardcore, G4 is more of an awareness game than a combat challenge. The minigun is the most useful weapon to fend off G4, as its weak spot is an infinitely regenerating tumor. I've always wondered how I'd see the world with 3 eyes. How about 47? G4 has a very similar moveset to G3, but with loss of humanity comes animal inhibition, and with it, G4 can sprint across the platform, dealing massive damage. He also climbs up the walls and jumps down to either the tram or the ground, a necessary cinematic break to an otherwise flat conclusion. While somewhat repetitive from his girthy health, watching the good doctor crawl towards you with the little strength he has left is one of the most satisfying boss conclusions in recent memory. Between the narrative being better overall and her more powerful range of weapons, Claire is already the more enjoyable playthrough for me. However, G4 is a significantly better final boss than Super Tyrant and solidifies Claire's run as the inherently more enjoyable playthrough between her and Leon's.
How incredible is it that in a game where more than half the bosses are William Birkin's ugly mug, I only wound up scripting for one of them? What a crazy coincidence, right? Anyways, G2. This fight is cool because it's a mix of the 2 prevailing types of fights in this game, the shoot it till it dies fights and the Super Tyrant style survive for X amount of time thing. Your goal is to weaken G2 enough to send him flying off the platform with a crane, which is just as tremendously satisfying as it sounds. By this point, the good doctor is still a recognizable biped, although he now has a nasty case of Akira arm. As always, lighting him on fire is a good way to shred his health, although Claire has a rough time of it. It's a cool, intense way to cap off the sewers, an astoundingly rare case of a sewer level in a game that is actually good.
Me? G? There's a pattern going on here. G1 was one of the few things in the Resident Evil series I knew about before starting it, and I only knew about him because I'd watched Boss Fight Database in class during my senior year, and I remembered G1 because I thought he had a really gnarly design. In the original Resident Evil 2, G1's reveal was paced out and only bits of him at a time were shown in cutscenes, contrary to his sudden jump scare in the remake that, at least for me, works better with regards to intimidation and shock value. Also in the original, G1 kills Chief Irons right before his fight in Claire A, and in Leon A, G1 kills Ben instead of Mr. X, but the fight is mechanically the same between both runs. This goes for the remake as well. G1 has different introductions for Leon and Claire, but is still the same. However, due to Claire's grenade launcher, it is much easier as a Redfield than a Kennedy, a trend among basically any fight in the remake. G1 was a major learning moment for me, in that the Resident Evil remakes have item spawns for when you're out of ammo and healing. I didn't know that in my initial Leon A attempt and just restarted the game because I entered G1 with a single round in my Matilda, so I thought I was soft-locked. But even without additional item spawns, G1's arena is already preloaded with grenades, flashbangs, and ammo galore should this happen. The arena is also the highlight of the fight for me. Its layout is interconnected in a circular structure but features small, walled-off extensions that have extra resources. The price for getting these items, however, is being cornered by G, but if you're skilled enough, either basic evasion or a well-timed grenade makes these pit stops well worth your while. It's neat how the more you fight G1, the easier it gets as you have a better mental map of the arena. Knowing your exits for when he catches up to you is massively important, and if you fought him enough, running and shooting at a safe distance is really nothing more than a passive challenge. The longer the fight goes on, the more and more discolored his infection gets, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that baiting G1 into wildly swinging around gas tanks leaks steam that both stuns him in the moment and partially blinds him after, making the fight even easier, but also makes his sudden chase sequences scarier by trade. G1 makes for easily one of my favorite first bosses of any game, and kickstarts William Birkin's horrific decline in stellar fashion.
The man of the hour, Mr. X, takes home a respectable silver medal all said and done. I don't really consider him a boss as much as a gameplay mechanic, but the consensus amongst Resident Evil 2 YouTube coverage seems to be that he counts, so here we are. Nobody will argue that being chased by someone who wants to harm you is one of the most terrifying experiences one can have. I remember one time when I was in 5th grade going sledding with a friend of mine and some middle schooler dared me to break his phone for some reason. I actually did it, and he and his friends all freaked the hell out and started chasing us, and I was convinced they were going to pummel the life out of me if they caught up. After running through calf-deep snow for 20 minutes, we finally made it back to the house and locked the door. That feeling of relief is exactly what you get when you narrowly evade Mr. X and slide into a safe room. Even in moments of relative calm, there's the creeping unease that comes from knowing that at any moment he could barge in and sucker punch you straight to hell. For you guys out there who have played hardcore mode, you've stared true fear dead in the eyes. That stretch to get to the clock tower when you have to go through the liquor hallway with Mr. X behind you is absolutely harrowing. He doesn't just power walk, he fucking sprints towards you far faster than you can hope to outpace. If you don't know exactly what you're doing, you're in for slaughter. While horror games don't often scare me in the childish sense of sheer terror and shock now that I'm an adult, there is nobody on earth who will tell you the stress of being hunted by Mr. X doesn't get a reaction out of them. I think newer graphics make games less scary in general, so they gotta take their wins where they can get them. I'm still spooked by Luigi's Mansion for the GameCube, so make of that what you will. I gotta applaud Mr. X's design as well. The stylish trench coat and hat look awesome. I dig the 1940s noir detective look. Major props to whoever at Umbrella decided to swag this guy out. All in all, Mr. X is the iconic poster boy of Resident Evil 2 for good reason. He kicks fucking ass.
I would have loved to give my opinions on something besides G, but alas, the main antagonist's true last stand in my book is maybe the best survival horror boss I've fought. And it just so happened that every odd-numbered boss was William Birkin. Similar to Super Tyrant, this marks a stark contrast from classic survival horror to survival action in gameplay. Both G3 and Super Tyrant are inherently melee-based design-wise, but the main differences between the two are arena design and moveset fairness, of which I'll cover shortly. While not necessarily the final boss, G3 feels the most climactic, and especially in Claire AB, leads into Annette's well-deserved conclusion to her tragic accident. For William, this was more of a happy accident, devolving him beyond humanity and partially into his corrupted idea of the ultimate life form. Pause here for a lore explanation I wrote up. I originally was going to record this, but figured it'd work better as a written explanation, so enjoy. While in the Leon runs, G, and especially G3, feel more like personal attacks for no reason beyond vengeance, Claire runs and the subsequent introduction of Sherry Birkin gives G much heavier story implications. In combat, G3 shines in his arena layout, moveset, and relative speed, the latter a major problem among a lot of the earlier bosses in this video due to these fights' melee-centric designs that intrinsically counteract Resident Evil 2's tank system that lacks a dodge mechanic. G3 resolves this problem entirely, however, with a fairly balanced mixture of your your run-of-the-mill swipes, leaps, and stabs, as well as cinematic attacks that use different components of the arena, namely the canisters and elevator shaft, that both give time to damage his weak points and create cinematic flair. Knowing the fight was very high-end in health, the developers split the arena into 4 quadrants and put loads of resources along each's walls. Like G1, the trade-off is putting yourself in danger, but unlike G1, G3 has 3 low-health weak spots that stagger him, giving yourself time to loot with good aim. After bursting his 3 eyes, G3 opens his chest cavity, where you lay off every round of MQ-11 and flamethrower in your arsenal. Do this enough, and he dies. I think it's fair to say that G3 is objectively Resident Evil 2's best boss. Its cinematic spectacle, story implications, and placement at the height of Resident Evil 2's endgame makes it not just the best fight in Resident Evil 2, but one of the best horror bosses of all time.
Thanks so much for watching, we hope you enjoyed. This is still only the beginning of a much larger series covering the Resident Evil games, upcoming remake of Resident Evil 4 included. Stay tuned for that and more if you were into this video. That's all for now. Deuces.